Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Singh, Senior Consultant with HATS Consulting. Myself, along with my co-authors Jerry Herza and James Thorpe, submitted a paper for this year's ANCOLD conference titled Increasing Risks, the Unintended Effect of our TSF Standards and Guidelines. Before I get into the details of our paper, I would like to set the scene with regard to the amount of tailing standards and guidelines that currently exist. As part of a review project my co-authors and I recently completed, we reviewed the level of detail presented in the most prominent tailings-related guidelines, standards, and regulatory requirements from across the world. Altogether, we reviewed 19 regional frameworks, which consisted a total of 95 separate documents. Now, this is a tremendously vast number of documents on the topics of tailings design, management, and construction, and it should be noted that not all identified regional frameworks were included in this review. Now, in August of this year, a very important additional document was added to this plethora of documents that no doubt everyone reviewing this presentation is familiar with. This document, called the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, or the GISTM, was authored by the Global Tailings Review, or the GTR. Now, the GTR was initiated by three bodies: the International Council of Mining and Metals, the United Nations Environment Programme, and the Principles for Responsible Investment. The forming of the GTR and the production of the GISTM was in response to several catastrophic TSF failures in Brazil in 2015 and 2019, as well as the ongoing number of TSF failures since the 2015 Samarco failure. Given that there have been, on average, 5 TSF failures a year since 2015, it is understandable that stakeholders outside of the industry have decided to act. Given the prominence of the groups backing the GTR and the buy-in from the industry into the GISTM, the requirements in the GISTM will no doubt be viewed as the industry's standard of care, which has very real legal and commercial implications for all participants and stakeholders in the tailings industry. While standards on their own are voluntary with no requirements for any party to comply with them, often federal and state governments and their regulators will refer to a standard in legislation, making adherence to that standard a regulatory requirement. In addition, standards can become mandatory when a party refers to an external document in specifying minimum requirements in fulfilling a contract. As the 27 ICMM members are among the largest mining companies in the world, and they have committed to adhering to the requirements of the GISTM, it is almost a guarantee that the majority, if not all participants in the tailings industry, will be beholden to the requirements of the GISTM. As such, we, as an industry, have a vested interest in ensuring that the GISTM is as sound and as practicable as possible in regards to providing technical guidance, implementation, and the ability to verify compliance. Not only that, but this interest should also extend to the various supporting documents from the various industry bodies around the world that are producing or planning to produce guidance documents. During the consultation period for the draft revision of the GISTM in late 2019, my co-authors and I believe that the draft GISTM, as presented, may have had the unintended effect of increasing the risk that tailings management presents, perhaps not at a facility level, but on a global scale. This was the result of the GISTM not meeting the requirements of what a standard document should be, as well as the apparent underlying intent and reasonings for some of the GISTM's requirements. Now, before I continue, I would like to state that my co-authors and I fully support and applaud the overall intent and application of the final GISTM and commend the working group for undertaking a complex task and preparing a comprehensive and high-value document. Indeed, many of the critiques of the draft GISTM that my co-authors and I identified were since addressed in the final revision, which was issued in August of this year. However, we believe that many of the original concerns regarding the draft GISTM are still valid, as the potential for the increase in risk on a global level are still present due to the underlying intent of some of the GISTM requirements, or as a result of how the GISTM may be implemented by industry bodies and owners. In addition, with so many new or revise industry guidelines, regulations, and even internal standards for owners, my co-authors and I believe that the points that our paper raises can be considered by the working groups of these various guides and standards to increase the value of their documents as useful tailings management resources. In reviewing the GISTM as a standard, we first had to understand the fundamental characteristics of what a standard should be. In addition to the definitions presented on the slide, the Australian Standard Setting Organisation, Standards Australia, also classifies standard documents into two broad categories, either performance-based standards or prescriptive-based standards. These two types of standards essentially either tell you the objective of what needs to be achieved, that is performance-based, or alternatively, how something needs to be achieved, that is prescriptive-based standards. An example that easily demonstrates the difference would be for standards for a wall hook. A performance-based standard would tell you that a wall hook for a specific purpose needs to be able to hold 40 kilograms and would leave it up to the designer or the installer to work out how best to produce and install such a hook. On the other hand, a prescriptive-based standard would tell you exactly what the hook should be made of, the dimensions of the hook, and how to install it. Now, the reason that standards should fall into one of these two types of standards is because they do not allow for interpretation of what must be achieved. In addition, by specifying either the outcome or how to achieve the outcome, we're able to verify that something has been done to standards that industries or society has deemed acceptable. As a corollary to what I just mentioned, it is very important that every statement in a standard is precise, consistent, and unambiguous. If the language in a standard leaves either the outcome or the method even slightly open to interpretation, it leaves the possibility that someone will accidentally not meet the standard. As a side note, numerous standard setting bodies encourage the use of performance-based standards that only specify what is to be achieved. This limits the potential impact of regional or country-specific contexts and encourages optimization of methods and techniques that are used to meet an outcome. As tailings management is a global consideration that features many site and operation-specific considerations, the use of performance-based standards is something that should be considered. So how do we use an understanding of what a standard should be to make our standards and guidelines better? We should ensure that standards clearly define the requirements of an activity or product by either clearly and quantifiably stating how something should be done, or what is the expected outcome. The use of such words like appropriate, robust, conservative, or best practice are subjective and can lead to potential ambiguity, which means non-compliance can be argued. This is an issue when, as I stated earlier in this presentation, standards form regulatory compliance or contractual agreements. It is also very important that clear, concise, and defined language is used throughout the document. Critically important or technical words should be defined within the document and used consistently throughout. I'm sure many of you watching this presentation have come across instances where terms such as risk, hazard, and consequence have been used interchangeably regardless of their very different meanings. Again, by using important words interchangeably, the potential for non-compliance exists, or arguing that something is non-compliant is a potential. Apart from the form of a standard, I would like to highlight two important and interrelated concepts for standards. These are net benefit and implementation. Whenever a standard is introduced, various trade-offs occur. A standard may make a process more expensive or onerous due to the stated requirements. However, it may make an activity or product safer. It is important that this trade-off results in a net benefit. Otherwise, the standard actually makes things worse when all things are considered. In the instance of tailings facilities and the GISTM, the trade-off may be more onerous design, management, and governance practices. However, the offset is reduced risks to downstream societies and environments. Now, the issue in understanding and confirming these trade-offs is whether a net benefit is achieved. It's that these trade-offs are not directly and immediately comparable. An example is costs and risks. Indeed, Standards Australia encourages a formal net benefit assessment to be carried out for all standards, where all impacts from implementation are quantified in a common manner to allow a true net benefit to be understood. My co-authors and I understand the implementation of the GISTM was outside the scope of the GTR. However, we believe that a net benefit assessment may have shown a net loss in the global context, with the potential for increased risks in the long run to downstream populations when considering the practicalities of implementing the GISTM. I want to touch upon just one of the hypothesized impacts in our paper, and I encourage you to read our paper for a more detailed assessment of this impact, as well as other impacts we have hypothesized. One important impact when considering implementation of the GISTM is the demand on resources in the tailings industry. The GISTM calls for multiple positions such as the engineer of record, responsible tailings facility engineer, and members of independent tailings review boards to be fulfilled for the direct management, review, or design of any TSF. Most of these roles are mutually exclusive, and some have minimum experience requirements, such as a minimum of 15 years experience of relevant experience, regardless of the consequence or risk posed by a given TSF. Due to the limited number of suitably qualified and experienced tailings practitioners, there are currently insufficient resources to meet the roles nominated in the GISTM for the design, review, and management of the reported 1,930 TSFs around the world. Now, the issue of succession planning in our industry is known by all, and the GISTM may exacerbate this by requiring 15 years experience for some of the positions, regardless of the context of the TSF. To further exacerbate this issue, it is very likely that all owners will seek to engage the most skilled and experienced individuals for the nominated roles in an attempt to lower the risks presented by their portfolio TSFs, regardless of the true consequences and risks presented by the TSFs in that portfolio. Ultimately, the more resourced owners will have the capacity to attract the individuals in the industry who are truly suitably qualified and skilled to fulfill roles prescribed in the GISTM, regardless of the true consequences or risks of those TSFs. This will force the smaller owners and non-ICMM members to engage the less capable resources from the depleted resource pool for their TSFs. And these TSFs will include TSFs with truly extreme consequences of failure. Therefore, the implementation of the GISTM may result in a greater number of true extreme consequence TSFs being in the hands of less capable and less experienced tailings practitioners, which will increase the likelihood of truly extreme consequence TSF failures. While our paper does not offer an immediate suggestion to address this issue, as resource allocation is a systemic issue that our industry faces, a suggestion to this issue, as well as to the other issues in our paper, is that implementation and understanding the net impact of our standards is essential. Perhaps if a net benefit assessment of the GISTM, which considered implementation, was carried out, the requirements in the GISTM may be slightly different. Some other suggestions include considering a consequence-based framework to scale the requirements for TSFs, including the qualifications of personnel required to manage the TSFs. Now, to reiterate, my co-authors and I truly believe the GISTM is an impressive document that has immense value as a tailings management standard. We believe that further improvements can be made to it by considering the fundamental requirements of the standard. Further, we encourage all working groups currently writing new or revising existing guidelines and standards to consider the suggestions my co-authors and I raise in our paper. I would like to thank my co-authors for assisting me in producing this paper and presentation, and I would like to thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. Thank you very much.